On behalf of the Asia and the Pacific Sites of Conscience Network, welcome to our fourth and final day of Transformative Documentation, New Approaches to Community-Driven Documentation Initiatives. The third and final global workshop in our 2020 virtual series, Countering Erasure, Addressing Absent Spaces, Amplifying Voices at the International Coalition of Sites of Conscience. My name is Silvia Fernandez, and I am the Global Networks Program Director at the International Coalition of Sites of Conscience. As you know, the meeting is being translated into Arabic, English, French, and Spanish. To activate the translation feature, please click the interpretation icon at the bottom of your screen. Please remember to keep yourself muted when not speaking. If you have technical problems during the meeting, today we have Ashley with us, so please make sure to reach out to her. Hi, Ashley. Tech support through a private chat. Thank you. In the chat box, Ashley and Camille and Elena has posted the meeting's full agenda in Spanish, Arabic, English, and French, as well as the links to the 3 resource Padlets. We have been uploading the resources and presentations shared throughout the meeting to this Padlet. So as I've been saying, please feel free to use them and to access them. Finally, please, the evaluation polls and the surveys that we will be sharing with you throughout the meeting. Please, it really only takes a few minutes to fill them out, so please do so. Previous one, sorry. Coalition, just do a quick overview of the coalition and then. So for those of you joining us for the first time, the coalition is the only global network of historic sites, museums, and memory initiatives that connect past struggles to today's movements for human rights and social justice. Founded in 1999, now we have over 300 members in 65 countries. We support our sites in a variety of ways, including grants, networking, joint programs, and training workshops like this one today. For more information, including how to join the coalition, please visit our website at sitesofconscience.org. Next one, Ash. Transformative documentation, the title and topic of this week's meeting, comes from the need of the Asian and Pacific Sites of Conscience Network to debunk official grand narratives and bring to the fore the voices of victims, women, youth, and ethnic groups ethnic and religious minorities in order to create alternative, more inclusive and egalitarian national and regional historical narratives. Yesterday, we had a full day of peer-to-peer exchanges, presentations, and capacity building sessions centered on the critical role community-led documentation plays in healing, reparation, and truth-seeking. Today, as we mark International Human Rights Day, we want to examine the role community-led documentation plays in advocacy, and in particular in atrocity prevention. To that end, we have put together what we hope is an engaging and thought-provoking agenda. Following this introduction, representatives from the Global Initiative for Justice, Truth and Reconciliation will present their work supporting and strengthening survivors and local civil society actors' capacities to engage in, advocate for accountability for atrocities against the Rohingya. The presentations will be followed by a roundtable session with 3 coalition members from Bangladesh, Bosnia and Herzegovina, and Uganda on challenging impunity and advocating for early warning response. And after the break, we will come together as a global network of sites of conscience to reaffirm our commitment to turning memory to action and building cultures of lasting peace. So with any further delay, I would like to hand it over to my colleague Dario Colmenares, Program Director at the Global Initiative for Justice, Truth and Reconciliation, the Coalition's flagship program on transitional justice. Thank you, Dario.
Thanks, Silvia. Thank you very much. Well, everybody, it is a great pleasure for me to be sharing this space in the International Day of Human Rights. And I'm pleased to introduce our program within the Global Initiative for Justice, Truth and Reconciliation called the Rohingya Documentation Program. or the Rohingya Documentation Initiative, which is intended to support the Rohingya communities and civil society in developing their own concepts and strategies and tools for transitional justice in a way when in a moment when transitional justice is not completely in place. So in a preparation for a future or a coming accountability process, and also for truth-telling and many other aspects of transitional justice, which are anyway applicable to the Rohingya communities, despite the unfortunate condition that the mechanisms for transitional justice are not in place due to the circumstances. However, well, this program started in the camps in Cox's Bazar shortly after the great migration pressure of nearly 1 million Rohingya fleeing from Myanmar due to the violent actions of the military against the population there. And we started by developing a needs assessment and research in the camps, and that was held throughout 1 year with our partners of this program, which I'll introduce in a moment. And one of the main findings of this preliminary needs assessment was that one of the most important needs was to provide the Rohingya with tools, capacities, and support to develop their own strategies for transitional justice, and to start preparing their documentation, their own documentation. So instead of thinking of extractive documentation where an external actor comes to the camps, to the refugee camps, and prepares the documentation with the point of view of an outsider, even if the outsider has an intention of objectivity, that leaves aside many very relevant needs of the community, which will only be clearly defined, felt, and advocated by the community itself. So for that reason, we decided to develop this project supporting the Rohingya communities to help them develop these tools. And next, can we go to the next slide? So I will have a very, very short introduction. I don't want to take much time because we have many things to describe and discuss here. But then I will just mention our representatives of our partners here for this presentation, and I will refer you to the bios section. I think somebody put it. Did you put it, Sylvia, in the chat? I guess, or Elena, or
yeah, Elena will do. Don't worry about it. Yeah.
So Elena will put the link to the bio section if you want to go through the details of each of these speakers from our partner organizations. So I won't spend much time in that. Unfortunately, we're very short of time. I'm aware of that. So Kate Gibson will speak on behalf of PLPG, the Public International Law and Policy Group, Marivic Mall on behalf of the Center for Studies of Violence and Reconciliation. Sofia Mazariegos will present the part of the program corresponding to the Forensic Anthropology Foundation of Guatemala, and Pia Condorcet will be introducing the activities under the responsibility of AJAR, the Asian Justice and Rights. So these 5 organizations, because in addition to these 4, it's the International Coalition of Sites of Conscience conducts some of the activities. These 5 organizations are 5 out of 9 organizations that compose the Global Initiative for Justice, Truth, and Reconciliation, which is the consortium leading this project, and under the coordination of the International Coalition of Sites of Conscience. I will not go into details of the bios of the speakers. You should forgive me for that, but then I will kindly ask you to refer to the bios page. Okay, next. Next. Okay, so in the Rohingya documentation initiative, we have, as I just mentioned, several partner organizations. Here are the 5 listed there, in case you want to take notes. And the project is being developed with the very important advisor role of for the program of the Liberation War Museum. The Liberation War Museum has been very supportive from the beginning of this process. They helped us put together our project from the very beginning, and they always provide very useful advice to develop our strategies in this project. And in addition to that, we have a local partner in Cox's Bazar, which is an NGO called Pulse Bangladesh, locally based in Cox's Bazar, which is our main intermediary for most of the activities in the camps. However, each of the partner organizations has their own additional intermediaries. They will speak about this in a moment. Next. So the program consists of several areas. There are several activities that we are developing. As I mentioned briefly a while ago, the main objective is strengthening the community for the development of transitional justice strategies. And in this sense, documentation is the core area of interest. So we are, as PLPG will explain later, we are committed to train and support Rohingya documentation missions, and Rohingya comprised of Rohingya community leaders and documenters to develop documentation. You know, that is a great challenge because as we saw in the training, conducting the documentation has numerous nuances, and the training of each documenter is a process that takes time, but PLPG will explain further in their presentation. And related to that, we are also developing a database for the documentation of human rights abuses for future transitional justice processes. We also have a community truth-telling activity. We are intending to engage the Rohingya communities in truth-telling activities through art and cultural workshops. And the purpose of that is to encourage the communities, the Rohingya communities, in developing their own direct truth-telling, the truth-telling initiatives, which will, in a way, strengthen their capacity to then engage in a more structured documentation process, which is the first activity that I mentioned above. Next. Then CSVR is our main partner or our partner responsible for the psychosocial support program. This documentation process, of course, requires the development of capacities in psychosocial support for it to be successful. And CSVR, Marivik, will explain us in a minute the details of this strategy. In relation to the forensics, we are conducting a legal analysis of the viability and legal basis for well, to support a strategy in sample collection, in DNA sample collection, and with the idea of developing a pilot family reference database, including initial genetic information studies, and that will be conducted by the Forensic Anthropology Foundation of Guatemala. They will explain that in a while. Next. There's another section of the program, which is basically AJAR's part of the project, consisting of awareness raising and other capacity building within the Rohingya communities, including transitional justice workshops, capacity building, and promoting dialogue among Rohingya women facilitators, and in a similar way with male facilitators and with the youth and other leaders in developing a program of peer support, an internship program for Bangladeshi youth, and also the production of human rights educational materials. Next. Ajar will explain that in a minute. And finally, we have within the program awareness raising and capacity building activities, such as participating in this forum, in this regional meeting, the regional Asia meeting, where we, hold on one second, where we are providing information for this very robust network that we have in the Asia region to develop some awareness of the process that we are developing, but also as part of the strategy to later develop activities to develop awareness and to provide tools for awareness raising in relation to the Rohingya issue in all the countries of the region. We will also be conducting regional trainings and exposure for Bangladeshi NGOs and Rohingya leaders not living in the camps. And this leads us to the last thing that I would like to mention before handing on to our partners, which is we are not only focused on the Rohingya community, Rohingya civil society, but we're also focused in developing capacities in the host community, which is the Bangladeshi community, both in the area, in Cox's Bazar, and at the national level in other areas, which we will coordinate with our partners in Bangladesh and mainly the Liberation War Museum. But the idea with this is to develop activities to help ease the relationship and overcome tensions between the host community and between the Bangladeshi community and the Rohingya community. So that said, well, our responsibility as the International Coalition of Sites of Conscience is centered in the development of truth-telling activities through arts and culture, but also in the coordination of all these teams. So that said, I won't take more of your time, and I'll hand on to Kate Gibson, who will explain us the role and activities of PLPG. Welcome, Kate.
Thanks very much, Dario. And good morning, everybody. My name's Kate Gibson and I'm a senior legal advisor with the Public International Law and Policy Group. And I'm talking to you today from Geneva in Switzerland. A really freezing day here in Switzerland, but I'm very pleased to be with you to give you a very brief overview of PILPG's contribution to this Bangladesh Rohingya documentation initiative. PILPG has really been involved in the Rohingya crisis since very soon after the mass displacement that Dario was talking about, which commenced in August 2017. Could I have the, thank you. In the months that followed the atrocities and the mass displacement, we really witnessed this huge flurry of activity of documentation efforts in the camps in Cox's Bazar in Bangladesh, where mainly international organisations really rushed to try to capture in some way the scale and the scope of the human rights abuses and the atrocities that had been committed and how these events had unfolded. But what was missing from this initial period was any kind of locally led effort. So the Rohingya groups themselves collecting and collating what was effectively their own information. And so that's where we believe this initiative steps in to fill a gap. And it's different from other documentation efforts because it seeks to train local documenters, both Rohingya and Bangladeshi, on how to credibly collect information about human rights abuses and atrocities in Rakhine State that can best contribute to future justice and accountability efforts and try to prevent future atrocities and support eventual transitional justice and truth-telling processes. So PILPG has been involved in all three phases of this consortium project, and under phase one, PILPG was the lead implementing partner. But as I'm sure you're aware, collecting information about human rights abuses and atrocity crimes in an effective way, in a standardized way, and in a way that still respects the dignity of victims and survivors and witnesses is a very difficult thing. It's not an easy task. And so PILPG's role in this consortium project has really focused on training, largely training identified local documenters to build the skills that they need as individuals to be able to document abuses in an internationally credible way, in a systematic way, but then also to foster coordination and collaboration among the documenters within the Rohingya communities, with the goal of sort of streamlining what's happening in the camps, streamlining the process of documentation. Can I have the next slide? Thank you. So how did we do this? How was this done? Well, firstly, in March of 2019, PILPG conducted an in-country assessment mission that Dario referred to go into the camps and try to identify the groups who were best placed to lead this civil society documentation efforts and who could be part of a pilot program. And this was done. 2 local Rohingya groups were identified who had already been engaging in documentation efforts. And then in February of this year, PILPG conducted a 3-day in-person workshop on documentation training together with CSVR. And over these 3 days, PILPG worked with these local documenters and discussed and engaged on topics such as doing no harm in the documentation process, basic personal security, basic logistics for documentation, best practices for interviewing, best practices for collecting and storing evidence and information, and also statement analysis. Can I have the next slide, please? Now, obviously, our ability to conduct these in-person trainings has been restricted by COVID. So in July, PILPG concluded a sort of reprogramming process with the GITJ, our partners, and redesigned our activities in line with the restrictions in the camp and travel restrictions due to COVID. And these reprogramming activities focused on shifting to a remote training model, which essentially means for the trainings that we would have liked to have done face-to-face, we're now facilitating them being done remotely. So we are recording and preparing videos and preparing associated training materials for our local partners, Pulse, to distribute to the Rohingya beneficiaries in the camp. So we've now recorded several modules of training via these videos, and with the support from Pulse's in-country staff, these videos have been distributed to the Rohingya participants along with, handouts and documents that they can use to follow along. And our feedback so far for this remote training has been positive. Next slide, please. PILPG is also involved in phases 2 and 3 of the project. We started our activities under phase 2 in December of last year, which has primarily been, reprogramming for these remote trainings and coordinating pro bono legal advice and support for other groups. The next focus of our work is going to be on building upon this first layer of documentation trainings and leading these documentation pilot programs where our identified Rohingya documenters are going to put together or create documentation plans for pilot missions and then go out and actually carry out these pilot missions. So collect statements from witnesses and victims and survivors themselves. And then we're going to come back together and have advanced training so that the groups who conducted the pilot missions can learn from each other and share lessons from how it went. Overall, we think this initiative has tremendous practical benefit in terms of documenting atrocity crimes in this community, particularly as we see now accountability efforts really expanding in relation to the crimes committed against the Rohingya. We have the proceedings before the International Court of Justice in The Hague that were brought by the Gambia against Myanmar. We have an investigation opened by the International Criminal Court's Office of the Prosecutor, and we now have the Standing United Nations mechanism for Myanmar, the Independent International Investigative Mechanism here in Geneva. All of these accountability efforts are supported by documentation. And so we see this initiative as really playing a key role in that process. I'll stop there because I'm aware of the time, but I'm very grateful for the opportunity to be with you all today and discuss our contribution to this important project.
Thanks, Kate. And we now have the presentation of CSVR's activities by Marivic Mo. Hi, Marivic, welcome.
I'm sorry, I'm muted. Good morning, assalamu alaikum, buenas tardes, bon après-midi. From South Africa, I greet you, Sanbonani. My name is Marivic Mall. I am a senior psychosocial trauma professional who's worked with the Center for the Study of Violence and Reconciliation for the last 22 years. Next slide, please. I had thought that I should give you the background of our organization for you to understand what is underneath what we do. So we work towards societies that are peaceful, equal, and free of violence. Next slide, please. We were established in 1989 as a project for the study of violence of the Psychology Department of the University of Witwatersrand. So here you will already have an idea of why we do what we do, why we're heavily rooted in mental health and psychosocial support. So this year we celebrated our 31st anniversary, and our mission is to work towards understanding violence, healing its effects, and building sustainable peace and reconciliation in South Africa, the region, and throughout the world. Next slide, please. We work in engaging in targeted research, advocacy with civil society and state institutions, both nationally, regionally, and internationally, and working with individuals and communities through the delivery of direct interventions with our trauma clinic and our community interventions team. Next slide, please. So how did we get here? How did we get from being, a project of the psychology department to an independent non-governmental organization that works in the field of transitional justice and peace building, but heavily rooted in mental health and psychosocial support? Next slide, please. Through 3 decades of working in the fields of transitional justice, peace building, and mental health and psychosocial support, we've learned lessons. And the lessons are that, consequences of unresolved trauma threatens foundations of any attempt to build sustainable democracy, peace, and security. That despite human and financial investments in post-conflict recovery and development, in our experience in transitioning South African countries, various forms of historically entrenched oppression and violence remain or re-emerge post-conflict. Next slide, please. So the key reason for this, as our research has shown, is the failure to recognize the impact that high levels of individual and collective trauma experienced by local populations and government leaders have had on resilience capacities and sustainable peace in these different countries. We've also learned that the transformation of institutions that are central to accountable democracy requires the building of mutual trust that has been lost when there is extreme violence between the state and its citizens to be sustained. However, in the aftermath of war, genocide, if we may say, and other forms of violent conflict, trust is usually shattered, and unresolved trauma creates conditions that foster intolerance and inflexibility, thereby making the cycle of violence just go on and on and on. Next slide, please. So we are bringing to the Rohingya projects lessons that we have learned from our South Sudan Human Rights Documentation Project. This project commenced in 2015, and CSVR has been with ICSC and PILPG also with this. And we are currently on phase 5, going into phase 6 in 2021. And we have learned important lessons from this project. We've seen that helping documenters by giving them trauma-sensitive skills is very important. We also saw that it's crucial to offer support to documenters who usually come from the same communities as the victims who are supposed to be interviewed, okay? So these documenters do get traumatized through hearing the traumatic stories of the victims. So we help give them skills to manage victims' reactions and their own trauma reactions. Next slide, please. We've also learned the importance of working with local organizations who provide support to their communities. And we do this through strengthening their skills so that victims who they work with can start their healing journeys. We also help them strengthen their local advocacy and help create a network of referral for victims. We also work with victims in individual and community levels. Next slide, please. So in working with, we also seek to work with local psychosocial support organizations or groups where there are no formal organizations. So we support them in dealing with their own reactions, because these are the groups who eventually get the victims who have been interviewed by the documenters. We help them in understanding their own trauma and learning to transform the trauma to move them from being wounded healers. We help them serve as role models for the communities, where we show that change actually starts with the self. It's also crucial that ongoing supervision and support to deal with challenges that come with implementing the tools gained during the workshops be made. We encourage the celebration of successes that are context sensitive. So in the Rohingya project, next slides, please. So in the Rohingya project, we have been heavily involved in the assessment missions, where we provided the psychosocial lens through which to look at documentation and human rights violations. We do training workshops on documentation with the Rohingya civil society, but this is in terms of psychosocial support training with the documenters. We then see ourselves, when the missions start, doing pre and post mission psychosocial briefing and debriefing with documenters as required. Because in our other projects, we've seen that this is crucial to help the documenters manage the effect of the documentation missions, to help them become more effective and efficient documenters, because information gets lost when information that they gather is too painful to remember and document. So we help give them skills in managing their reactions in the process, whether it's in preparing for the missions, during the missions, or in writing up the mission reports. One thing that we also found is that data capturers, people who then put in do input of the data in the database, do get affected by reading the painful materials that the documenters have written in their reports. So it's also very important to provide them with psychosocial support in terms of counseling or debriefing, whatever the need is required. Next slide, please. So we're currently doing, through the PULSE coordinators, a mapping of formal and informal psychosocial support structures in the camps, in the Rohingya camps. And we have found that there's virtually no government, the government does not really recognize Rohingya organizations. So there's virtually no formal organizations within the Rohingya communities who provide psychosocial support. Many of them are loose groups or individuals, informal helpers. But we have then encouraged the coordinators to get them on board so that we can provide them with more skills to deal with whatever problems or concerns victims who have come forward in the documentation process as interviewers and manage their post-interview symptoms or reactions. We will provide supervision and support to local Bangladeshi organizations. Last year, in February and March, because of the difficulty in accessing Rohingya organizations, we decided to train Bangladeshi organizations. So we have trained 5 organizations with 10 staff members on providing mental health and psychosocial support through the psychosocial wellness workshop. So this we've done, but we would want to continue doing this in the next phase. And then with the mapping exercise, where we have found Rohingya support structures, we will then be training 15 males and 15 females in respect to the cultural nuances. We will train them separately. And so after the workshops, we will be providing regular supervision and support. Then after, in phase 3, we will be providing small grants to support local Rohingya social support organizations and groups. Right now, because of the pandemic, everything is done virtually. So we are in the process of training the PULSE coordinators so that they will then be our presence when training of the documenters happens. Thank you.
You muted, Dario. Dario, you muted.
I'm sorry, yes. Thanks so much, Marivik. And Sofia Mazariegos will present the activities of the Forensic Anthropology Foundation of Guatemala. Welcome, Sofia.
Good morning, everybody. I am speaking to you from Guatemala, so it's very early right now, but very happy to be here. I'll try to be very brief. So can we go to the next slide, please? So we are the Forensic Anthropology Foundation of Guatemala. We've been working over 25 years on searching and identifying for the disappeared, particularly in Guatemala after a 36-year armed conflict. Our organization works with different scientific departments. But mainly, it starts with victim investigation and documentation with any information we can get from the victim prior to their disappearance. Also, we have forensic archaeologists going to exhumation sites, mass graves, and clandestine cemeteries to exhume skeletal remains. Then they take them to the forensic anthropology department who try to identify and register any information they get from the skeletal remains. And we also have a forensic genetics department from where we can get the identifications with DNA samples from their survivors and their relatives. And in the end, we also, when we have a match and identification, we return the remains to their family so they can have a dignified burial. So far, we've had 3,647 confirmed identifications from the conflict. So it's been a long time working on this. Next, please. So why is it important to search for the disappeared? First, everybody thinks they're going to find their missing person alive, but if not, it's important to recover the body. And for transitional justice purposes, it supports the truth, reparation, and most importantly, non-repetition of any atrocities by dignifying with a dignified burial, and then people finding their loved one. Next, please. So the Forensic Anthropology Foundation of Guatemala also has some international experience. And what we do is that we want to share the experience that we've gained in Guatemala and to build local capacity and knowledge of forensic sciences and support any families of the disappeared with experiences from families in Guatemala. And we also accompany other national mechanisms to investigate and resolve cases of missing and disappeared persons in different countries, for example, Colombia, Mexico, El Salvador. And we also assess, monitor, and evaluate forensic processes. Next, please. So for the Bangladesh Human Rights Documentation Project in 2018, the FAFG went to the camps in Bangladesh to do an assessment, a scoping mission to examine the needs and priorities of the Rohingya refugees with family members who are missing, disappeared, or presumed dead. As the result of this atrocities happening in Myanmar, and to assess what is needed to launch an effort to document the victims and generate a comprehensive antemortem database of the victims and relatives for future identification processes. Antemortem means all the information that we can get from victims prior to a disappearance. Next, please. So what the FAFG investigators did is that they conducted a series of informative presentations about the search for the victims and disappeared in Guatemala. They share their experience, and after that they follow with interviews to hear the needs and priorities of people. This was done from English to Rohingya translations, so it wasn't directly, there might be some it was a bit complicated with the translation, but that's how it was done. Next, please. So in this picture, you can see when they were asked to raise their hands if they have a loved one who was missing and disappeared or killed, and if they wanted to speak with the FAFG team about their victim, they all said they wanted to. So there is a need for this. Next, please. From this activity, they did 20 group sessions, and they collected 268 individual interviews. Next, please. Thank you. And from this individual interviews and the group sessions, they reported 767 victims. Next. So based on this information, the FAFG recommended that there has to be an establishment of a family member reference genetic database of all the missing, disappeared, and presumed dead antemortem database and list of victims within a multidisciplinary human identification strategy to support future possibly family reunification efforts. Also, dedicated and parallel psychosocial support accompanying program for the families for the missing and disappeared victims who participate and contribute to the creation of that family member reference genetic database. And also, FAFG recommended that any forensic effort must take into consideration accountability and reparations to ensure this identification and family reunification effort, and it's grounded in a larger and long-term transitional justice process. So next, please. For this phase of the documentation initiative, we are currently undergoing a legal analysis for the DNA Act in Bangladesh for sample collection, for DNA sample collection authorization to know what is the scope, what can we do, and what are the limitations for collecting any DNA samples. The following activities that we're gonna have on this project is to have an awareness raise.
I think we lost Sophia. Sophia.
Hello.
Okay, now you're back. You were talking about the awareness raising. Yeah.
Sorry. I think my internet is not stable. Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can.
Yes. Okay. So yes. So we're going to have one workshop for 10 representatives of local partners and documenters on forensic efforts to document crimes and human rights violations. So then we have trained people to know how to collect samples and how to conduct the antemortem interviews. Next, please. The next slide, please. Thank you. In addition to this, we're going to have, no, the previous one. Thank you. So in addition to this, we're going to have building partnerships for future forensic efforts. And we aim to have at least 10 meetings with local and international organizations to begin discussions surrounding sustainable and long-term efforts to meet the needs of the families for their missing and disappeared persons. Next, please. And I think this is the last one, and one of the most important for us. So we're gonna aim to have a pilot family reference database, including initial genetic information studies. For this, we are aiming to collect 500 family member reference samples collected and analyzed. This database will have a report on chromosomes like X chromosome, Y chromosome, do a complete DNA analysis for a larger population study to inform and ground a longer-term genetic database effort to support the Rohingya relatives. And I think that is it. I try to be brief. If you have any questions, please just ask. Thank you. Thanks.
Yes, I would like to remind everybody that you can ask your questions in the chat box. So please go ahead and share your questions and we will answer at the end. And finally, on behalf of Asia Justice and Rights, AJAR, Pia Conradsen will introduce us to their activities.
Great, thank you so much, Dario.
Welcome, Pia. Welcome.
Thank you. Thanks, everyone. And please bear with me. I have a bit of congestion, so hopefully I'm not too nasally throughout this. So first, good afternoon, everyone. It's afternoon here for me in Indonesia. And as Dario mentioned, my name is Pia Conradsen and I work for Asia Justice and Rights. First, I'd like to thank all of the organizers for this conference. I know you've worked very hard and dealt with many strange hours, so we all appreciate that. And of course, to all of you who are joining now. And it's been a really great pleasure to work with you for the past year on this initiative. So by way of background of AJAR, we are a non-profit organization and our mandate is to seek and strengthen human rights and alleviate impunity in the Asia Pacific region. So for the past 10 years, AJAR has been facilitating learning circles and dialogues about human rights, documentation, conflict resolution, and holistic processes of healing and empowering survivors in countries including Indonesia, Timor-Leste, and Myanmar too. So when the violence against the Rohingya spilled into Bangladesh, as it did before, but in a large way in 2017, we decided that we needed to do something and realized that to secure the rights for everyone inside Myanmar, the movement must also include the rights of the Rohingya. So therefore, we created our Justice for All approach, which was born to begin working with different survivor groups who had suffered the violations of, by the hands of the same perpetrator. So yep, already next slide, thank you. So since February 2019, AJAR with the Liberation War Museum, we've been working with a growing network of now about 120 women inside the camps. And we have created a process of listening in with these women and facilitating workshops using participatory action methodologies to learn together about different human rights and justice principles. The purpose for us has always been to look at their situation in a holistic way. We use the transitional justice framework as a guide, but we really want to listen to what is their meaning of truth, how can we heal together from the impacts of violence, what does justice mean, what is the future they envision for themselves, and then for us, we provide the relevant tools and capacity building based on these priorities. So in one of the photos, the one with the flower and stone, that's from one of our manuals where we look at the different pillars of transitional justice, and the flower represents whether they feel like they have that element in their lives, and the stone represents that they feel like it's missing. So in that last quadrant there is justice, and you can see that there's a lot of stones there. So AJAR, together with LWM, we have produced a number of manuals for human rights activists working with survivors, and we always try to adapt them to each context. So we want to create a process where we could document and memorialize stories relevant to the community. Next slide, please. So over the past year, we've been listening to these women's life stories, which have begun to emerge through various mediums. Sewing has always been a common pastime for Rohingya women, and based on the reflections of their life stories, we asked them to sew a panel to express their feelings, their hopes, their dreams, and memories. So from these individual embroidered panels, we created a quilt to bring these stories together as a collective voice here. The quilt's been displayed in a public exhibition at the Liberation War Museum, and we also have a permanent online exhibition you can find on our website too. But creating these panels was just one way for the women to talk about their memories of home, what they hold dear, as well as their demands for justice and calls for action from us. So I like to imagine this journey like a tree. I had a picture of a tree, but it's missing here. So for us, first we had to build a strong earth or foundation, which was for us, trust with the women. And this to me has probably been the most important part. We really spent the time to earn their trust and build these strong, lasting connections. And as that grew, many branches have begun to emerge, and these stories and quilts are just one of them. We've also made different education materials on human rights and justice, including flashcards on the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. We've created episodes of drama series in Rohingya. We're also creating a mobile phone application that's in Rohingya, Burmese, and English on the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, and as well as a graphic novel on the different justice mechanisms. So these are the kind of branches of the tree that we're creating, and another branch is that we're starting to grow is working more with men in the camps in 2021. But sometimes, as you can see, this tree has no leaves. The environment can change and it can cause that tree to become distressed or damaged. So it means for us that we have to change what we're doing. We have to give it extra care for it to survive. So when the COVID-19 pandemic hit, we also realized we had to evolve and change our engagement, and in a very quick way. We responded by creating videos that were dubbed in Rohingya to continue our learning together that we sent over message. And the women communicated back to us. So one of the silver linings from this is that we began to see that their facilitation skills developed very rapidly. They were the ones who started organizing the workshops. They were gathering people. They made sure that they had the right materials and even summarized their discussions back to us. So we made sure that we continued to nurture this relationship and journey, this tree of ours. And we were very touched to hear that they felt that AJAR and LWM were one of the only NGOs that didn't abandon them during this time. Next slide, please. So in the past year, we've tried our best to listen and voice all of these stories we've heard, but unfortunately today we've been given a very short time to share. So I'd like to highlight just maybe 3 things. And the first is that this process that we're doing together under this initiative with all of us has given women confidence to voice their concerns and their lives. And they told us themselves that they feel like their lives is beginning to, in their words, bloom. So despite the fact that, you know, women are often constrained in their homes, they are incredibly resilient and passionate to help their communities. And we are already seeing them change the lives of so many others inside the camps, even without us there. So the response really needs to continue to support women. However, they don't always feel hopeful, and especially this year, we saw many factors that brought back trauma very quickly. You know, it's been particularly hard with the conflict in the camps, the fires, the monsoon, and of course the pandemic. So one of the lessons that we've learned is that we really need to start looking more long-term at this critical situation that the Rohingya face. And we have to be really more conscious of putting ourselves in their positions and understanding the mental and physical challenges that they're facing on a daily basis. Which brings me to my final point. And although it's not really a finding, it's more of a response that we've seen this year. The United Nations has estimated that thousands, they don't have the exact number, but thousands of Rohingyas have perished this year, trying to seek life in other countries by risking their lives at the sea. In the past month, the government of Bangladesh has relocated over 1,000 people to the remote island, with estimates of more. And then here in Indonesia, we've had more than 500 Rohingya arrive in our shores in Aceh, barely surviving the trip here. And the government here is providing as much support as possible, but it's still very hard. So we also need to respond to this ongoing situation, not only what happened in the past, but what's happening now, and begin the conversation with governments and donors that we need to start talking about third country resettlement for the Rohingya. And, you know, while we're continuing this longer journey of all of us and memorializing this situation, this could be equally met with how we can improve their current life as well. So I'll end there. I think I just had one last slide just with our logo. So I'd like to finish there and especially thank LWM for their support this year, and also you all for your time today. Thank you.
Thank you, Pia. So we still have a few minutes for questions and answers. So if anybody wants to clarify to have us clarify any aspect of the project or any comments, you're welcome to participate. I would ask you, Ashley, if you could turn off the sharing of screen so that we have the group view for the questions and answers. Thank you so much. I know that each of the partners would deserve a longer space of time to introduce the details of their activities, because they are all, they have many challenging situations that have been successfully overcome, but not always, and there are other difficult conditions that make this work and supporting the Rohingya very challenging. But unfortunately, we don't have much time. So here's a question for Pia. Would you be able to share more information about how the transitional framework that you apply in the project? Well, I guess it's this. How is the transitional framework in your activities in the project? Maybe.
Sure, thanks for the question too. I think it's a really important question. And so we've been, you know, it's a learning as we do process for us as well. And initially we tried to introduce the concept of transitional justice by doing a training on it, but we realized we needed to take a more sort of nuanced approach in bringing it forward. So, you know, when we organize our trainings, we look at the different pillars of it. So we look at the truth-seeking element of it, where we're looking towards the work that we're doing directly with the women. In terms of the other pillars, we're talking with different stakeholders, be it the justice mechanisms, or in the region here, we talk with ASEAN to provide kind of shadow reports to them as well. But I think for us also is that we also look at the pitfalls of the transitional justice framework as well, that this is what we're learning more and more, is that it's not a perfect framework, and it's a very long journey for it to be complete. And, you know, maybe at the moment, reparations is not possible, or it's going to be a long time until there's justice in the international courts. So that's why we're really focusing on looking at how we can help additionally in the current process. And that's why the last point I made about trying to put on the discussion that we're doing with other governments and donors is really talking about a different future of maybe third country resettlement too, as we see the crisis going into another year. In the region here, we're seeing so many Rohingya arrive on our shores. So I hope that kind of answers your question, and I'm always happy to talk further as well over email.
Thanks, Pia. We have a question from Nadia Islam. What are the ongoing initiatives or plans regarding the present situation or questions? How do you see Bangladesh's initiative of relocation? Well, I would like to say something in relation to that. One of the greatest challenges that we have right now in developing the documentation missions with the Rohingya communities. And I will then ask our partners to complete this answer. But one of the main challenges that we have right now is that for the purpose of collecting documentation and developing the databases, we need to, or in order to do it through the community and led by the community by Rohingya documenters, we would need to develop stable relationships with Rohingya organizations. We have been in contact with a number of Rohingya organizations, but we face a difficulty that sometimes they are not fully acknowledged by the local authorities in the camps, and that makes it difficult to develop consistent collection and custody of collected documents, because you cannot develop a database on the basis of individual isolated or isolated individuals, because you need to have some stability in the process, and that's when the Rohingya organizations become very important for this process. And it is very challenging to develop enough credibility for these organizations to have the support of local authorities, so that there can be a stable relationship for the collection of this information, of this documentation. And regarding other challenges, I would pass on the word to our colleagues in the partner organizations who would like to answer this. Kate, do you want to mention anything in relation to challenges?
I mean, yeah, of course, building on what Dario said, not only do we need to develop these stable relationships with the groups in the camps, but we need the documenters and the individual Rohingya groups that we've identified to have the capacity to keep engaging with their documentation work and with their training. And there are, as you rightly point out, a lot of external pressures and stresses and events that are happening in the camp that can overtake and become a more immediate concern that for people than sitting down and doing their video module on best practices for interviewing. You know, it's hard to, I imagine, and the feedback that we get is that it would be hard to focus on such concrete and substantive trainings when you're in this situation of such great uncertainty as there is at the moment in the camp. And the way that certainly my colleagues in INPA-LPG try and address that is just through really regular contact, both through Pulse, but then sort of individually via WhatsApp or other means, to just make sure that that connection remains and make sure that they're able to reach out to us as and when they have questions and concerns, and when they're available to refocus on the work that we're trying to do with them. But, you know, the question is right, it is a very important and timely one, because, you know, we're talking about people who are living in an incredibly uncertain and stressful environment.
Thanks, Kate.
I agree with Kate that, you know, a sense of safety is quite important before anything else can happen. And for us to force our way in and have our agenda and our projects as a priority is actually unethical, if I can say so. So yes, this is a big challenge for all of us, and being able to have that consistently communication given the constraints that happen. We do it through the Pulse coordinators, but we also have individual links to some of the women or some of the leaders. So yeah, I guess that's what we could do right now with what we have and the constraints that have been leveled upon us by the current context, the pandemic, and everything else. Thank you.
Thanks, Marivic. So if there are no further questions.
Sorry,
yep.
Daddy, there is a question from Nadia.
Okay.
What are the ongoing initiatives or plans regarding the present situation, or questions? How do you see Bangladesh initiative of relocation?
This is a very sensitive issue that we would like to discuss with local players, of course. I think that it would be interesting to have a closer dialogue and understanding of the current circumstances in Bangladesh in our dialogue with the Liberation War Museum and our partners, local partners in Cox's Bazar, because all the information we are getting is external to this process, as Mofidul mentioned it in the introduction of this conference the first day. So I don't want to jump into conclusions. It has been very much contested due to the instability or the apparent instability of the physical, like the physical conditions of the island, according to some agencies, international agencies, but that is indirect information. We really would need to have a closer dialogue with our local players, because we don't like forming opinions without consulting with our real experts, which are and who are the organizations inside Bangladesh, and particularly, well, the Liberation War Museum, our main consultant, or not consultant, sorry, our main advisor in this process.
Okay. Dario, can we?
Yep, just to wrap up then, I would, well, I appreciate the interest, and as you see, this is a very relevant process that we're conducting. The main problem here is to scale the activities, because as we start developing capacities at a modest level, because it cannot be otherwise. So we first need to develop small groups to deploy the strategy or to implement the strategies for documentation. We will eventually need to scale it in order to have a significant result. I leave this thought in the air so that some of you could maybe return to us with some interesting discussions that we will definitely have in the future in relation to the challenges of community-led documentation, not only in the Rohingya documentation initiative, but also in other Asia-based initiatives which you all represent. And I see that we also have the participation of African examples and maybe a Latin American example. We would be very happy to collect these thoughts through Sylvia and her team, and in order to develop toolkits, strategies, methodologies for the future. So thank you very much. I would then, I see there's a last question. Do we have a space for the last question, or can we? No. Well, I'm sorry. We will get to some space at the end of the conference to discuss things.
We may even do it during the coffee break. Unfortunately, we are already 20 minutes behind, and if not, it's just going to be really difficult to catch up. So.
Okay. So I'm sorry for taking all this time, but then I know that we rushed because there's so many aspects of this project, but we understand that we have to share the space with very important topics to come. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Dario, and thank you to the four of you for being here with us today, for introducing your work, for introducing yourself. Sometimes the GIJTR consortium is this abstract entity, so it was really nice seeing your faces and hear from you. And thank you for the presentation of the project. I have to say that I've not only found it incredibly informative, but I was impressed by the multidisciplinary and holistic approach that you are taking. So congratulations. I would like to now to move on to the next session, documenting for advocacy in atrocity. It was supposed to be a conversation by 3 representatives from member sites in Bangladesh, Bosnia and Herzegovina, and Uganda. Unfortunately, Victor Ochen, the executive director for the African Youth Initiative Network, AGINET, is not able to join us due to the violent situation in Uganda right now. So it will be just Emir. Well, I'm going to let Pratima make the introductions. The only good news about Victor Ochen not being able to join us is that he may help us with time. So my colleague Pratima Narayan, who by now you already know, she will be moderating the session. For those of you who don't know her, Pratima is Senior Program Manager at the Global Initiative for Justice, Truth and Reconciliation. She has over 14 years of experience conducting and leading investigations into violations of international human rights and humanitarian law. She has held various positions within the United Nations, including most recently as the Chief of Investigations for the UN Commission of Human Rights in South Sudan. Thank you, Pratima. I hand it over to you. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Sylvia. I'm just going to jump right in because I know that we have limited time. And I will also, I guess, warn my our panelists that I might improvise so that we try to end on time. So thank you, everyone. I'd like to welcome you to our next session on documenting for advocacy and atrocity prevention. As you're well aware, grassroots civil society actors serve as vital resources for the monitoring, investigation, and documentation of grave violations of international human rights and international humanitarian law. In addition to promoting respect for human rights, they also challenge impunity, and advocate for early warning and response. Today, we have with us coalition members from Bangladesh and the Balkans who will share how they have used documentation to support their advocacy efforts and prevent atrocities in different parts of the world. So without further delay, I'd like to introduce you to our first panelist. Dr. Amer Sugajic is the director of Srebrenica Memorial Center. As an interpreter for the United Nations, he survived the Srebrenica genocide in July 1995. He defended his doctoral dissertation, Ethnic Cleansing, Politics, Policy, Violence, Serb Ethnic Cleansing Campaign in Former Yugoslavia at the International University of Hamburg. Dr. Sugajic currently teaches international relations at the International University of Sarajevo. He is also the author of 2 books, Ethnic Cleansing, Politics, Policy, and Violence, Serb Ethnic Cleansing Campaign in Former Yugoslavia, and Postcards from the Grave. I'll also introduce you to Ms. Noreen Rahim, who holds an LLM in International Humanitarian Law and Human Rights from the University of Geneva and a Master of Social Science in Criminology and Criminal Justice from the University of Dhaka. After completing an LLB with honors from Eastern University in 2014, Noreen has done her postgraduate diploma in Genocide Studies at the Center for Genocide Studies at the University of Dhaka. Currently, she is working as a coordinator at the Center for the Study of Genocide and Justice at the Liberation War Museum. She has been a volunteer to the Liberation War Museum since 2014. The center at the museum is focused on prevention through education, and for this purpose, the center has engaged a wide range of youth from Bangladesh and other countries through its month-long certificate courses and week-long residential trainings on genocide and justice. Apart from all of these activities, Noreen has also been involved in the center's Rohingya research project since its 2017 inception, and has co-edited the publication titled Rohingya Genocide, Compilation and Analysis of Survivors' Testimonies in September 2018. With her team from the center, Noreen has been visiting the Rohingya makeshift camps and documenting the voices of the Rohingya community. So my first question will be for Amer. You have such an interesting and compelling background. Can you share more for the participants, a bit more about how your personal experiences living through conflict led you to your current advocacy efforts?
Well, good morning, everyone. Actually, not really morning, but halfway to noon here. Just a small correction. I did my PhD at the University of Hamburg, and I don't know if there is an National University of Hamburg, but there's that's the only Hamburg that I know. Now, in answer to your question, I was 20 years old when I got out of Srebrenica, and my first job was in journalism, and I stayed on for 10 years. And being a journalist and being able to write about what happened to my country, what happened to my fellow citizens, led me to sort of to a place where I could finally position my own experience.
Amer, we're having some difficulty hearing you. I'm not sure if it's because of the headphones, but I just wanted you to know.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
All right.
Yeah.
I'm in Srebrenica, and internet here is well, as you can see. Now, once again, being able to write, being able to investigate, and being able to sort of led me to a place where I was finally capable of my own experience in, if you will, the wider picture, the collective experience of, of my fellow citizens, of what happened to all of us. And then down, eventually one thing led to another, which, ended here where I am, and that's the Srebrenica Memorial. I'm really sorry about the internet here. This is the only connection that I have, and I really apologize for this.
Would it help to turn your video off temporarily while you speak?
Oh, I'd be more than happy. Okay. All right. Is this better?
Yes.
All right.
So far.
Yeah. Okay, good. I'm sorry once again. Now, being, having survived what I have, and I've always been interested in historical episodes of mass murder and mass killing, and I also wanted to be able to understand what happened to us, what happened to Bosnian Muslims, as part of the history of the country we live in and part of the history of the continent that we're on. Yeah, I guess this is a very long-winded and technically inadequate response to a question. Can you guys hear me at all?
Yes.
All right, good, thanks.
Are you finished responding?
I'm done. Yes, okay. Yes.
Thank you so much. I'll ask Noreen then our next question. How does your institution use documentation and strategies to advocate against different types of atrocities? For instance, genocide, war crimes, apartheid, crimes against humanity. Is this a decision that you make up front?
Thank you so much, Pratima, and good afternoon from here, from Bangladesh to all. My institution, Center for the Study of Genocide and Justice, which is under Liberation War Museum. Basically, the Liberation War Museum is mainly focused on exhibiting the artifacts and some other evidence and elements relating to our liberation war of 1971. But apart from that, it started doing the activism and some other projects and programs. So as part of their activities, basically in 1971, we have faced a brutal genocide, and the Pakistani army committed this genocide against the Bengali population. So the Liberation War Museum actually started documenting the victims of sexual violence of 1971. So this is how the journey started. And between 2005 to 2008, the museum already gathered so many testimonies from across the country. And this is how, through its own collection, they tried to engage the tribunal prosecutors and the investigation agencies to take this into their consideration. And this is how these testimonies actually worked out in the tribunals, in the domestic tribunals in Bangladesh. And then the center started its journey in 2014. And once the Rohingya influx came in 2017, late August 2017, apart from our other activities, we decided that we should initiate a particular project on this issue in the Rohingya crisis. And then we suddenly decided and then planned for the whole research project. And then we moved on to the Rohingya makeshift camps. So this is how actually the research program started, and now it has been expanded in different phases. So we have already conducted 6 visits, but I must tell you that it's not only limited within the documentation, I would say. We also went further, like as Pia in the last session actually mentioned about the quilt of memory and hope. In the Rohingya community, we have visited and communicated with so many Rohingya women. They are very much skilled in sewing. So this is how the quilt was made, and with Ajar, actually, the Liberation War Museum supported this initiative, and we published this quilt of memory and hope through an exhibition. And apart from that, as we are engaged in the documentation, we published our findings and some other informations. I can show you the reports. This is one report, as you can see. It was published in September 2018. And also we have this testimony of 60, where you can get 60 selected testimonies from the Rohingya communities that we have gathered from going to the camps. So this is how actually we are publishing our documentation strategies, our own findings, our legal analysis on genocide and war crimes. And also, as the museum and the center, these are basically looking forward to the activism side more. So we have been engaged in preparing a documentary, A Mandolin in Exile, which has been already showed last a few months back. And also during the COVID-19 situation, as we can't go into the camp areas, we tried to communicate and get involved again with the Rohingya people. And through our side, the employees of the Liberation War Museum tried to gather a fund and make them empowered. And then we actually, through this fund, we could buy 12 sewing machines to give the Rohingya women to utilize their own time and come with a very meaningful effort. So this is how actually our documentation phase is not only limited within writing a report or just gathering information, but we have expanded this into different phases. So thank you.
Thank you so much. That's so interesting. Do you have the documents that you showed us, are they in electronic version or are they only in hard copy?
Yes, I would love to share it into the chat box. I have the electronic print, so I will be sharing the link within this session. Thank you.
Thank you so much. That's really interesting. One question I did have is, how do you find the community responding to the work that you're doing?
As for, I would answer it into two parts, because we are involved in documenting two different aspects. So one is the documentation of 1971 victims of sexual violence. So when the initiative was started, at that time, actually, there has been so many projects, and some independent researchers have done all this researching and documentation within their own capacity. But our plan was different. And we always think that whatever we are documenting, whatever we are doing, collecting from the field and from the respondents, should be utilized in such a way that could bring them justice in a near future. So with keeping on this mind, we started documenting this type of testimonies, and then it was fruitfully utilized, I would say, to the tribunal. And I'm quite sure that within this 10 years of the tribunal establishment, so many victims have raised their voice, and they have found justice through this type of initiatives. And for the Rohingya research, it was in the beginning, it was quite difficult because when the influx came in, then so many international organizations and donor organizations were involved in the foreign aid and giving them shelters and some other basic necessities. So it was very difficult for us at that time to collect the information and disseminate this information to the world at large. But step by step, we could do it very fruitfully, and the civil society and other organizations in Bangladesh appreciated a lot on these initiatives, and then they actually followed the way that we started in documenting this crisis.
Thank you so much. That's really interesting. My next question then, I guess I'll ask you again, Noreen. How have the historical, political, economic, or even cultural constraints influenced the types of documentation you've been able to undertake? And what type of challenges have you had to overcome? You spoke a little bit about some of them, but are there anything, is there anything additional that you've had to deal with in your documentation or in your advocacy?
Yes, there are quite a few constraints that we usually face in documenting the atrocities. One of the basic challenge that we usually face is doing the documentation in a proper way. Because the institution, the center itself is a volunteer-run organization. So there are so many students are coming up in from different universities, from different disciplines. So they actually volunteer here, and we actually lack the knowledge of decoding, proper decoding, or preparing a database. So this is one challenge, I would say, while we document and collect all the information and then process. So this is one challenge. And there is another challenge, I would say, in the camp areas. There are quite a few things that we need to take care of. One of the issues is the language barriers, because the Rohingya language and the Bengali language is very different from each other. So whenever we are going to do the documentation, then we have to hire the interpreters to understand the whole scenario and to communicate with a particular Rohingya respondent. Then there is another problem that is usually when we try to take the interviews into the camp areas, then most of the cases, the family members of the particular respondent try to create a barrier, I would say, and this creates a very big issue for the researchers and the interviewers. So especially it becomes very difficult when we are actually taking interviews of the victims of sexual violence, because still it's a taboo, and the families actually don't want to express their own opinions and don't want to expose that particular family member into public, what she has faced or suffered. This is another thing. And then due to the shift of the communities within different camp areas, like when we started our research in 2017, the particular suppose a particular group used to live in a particular camp, and then in 2018 we could not find that particular families over there, and they were actually shifted into another camp. So it's very difficult for us to do the follow-ups with the respondents. So far we have been interviewed. So these are the basic problems that we faced, but this is how actually we try to try and make out some different alternatives in this regard.
Thank you so much. And I just wanted to follow up on your question, on your comment about working with survivors of sexual violence and the families. Were there any is there any more you can tell us about whether or not you undertook any sensitization activities within the community before embarking on the documentation process?
Yes, basically the team from the center consisted of the researchers who are basically the university going students. So they actually don't have prior experience in going to the field and doing the interviews with the respondents. So in the very beginning, we try to engage all those interested youths to take and attend the training sessions, where we actually try to inform them what are the things that they should follow. And usually for documenting the victims of sexual violence, we follow the Colombian protocol, and we have our own guideline to be followed. So this is how actually we prepare our own researchers, and also we have the psychological counselors with whom we actually go into the field. And whenever we are going to take a particular interview to the respondent, then the team consists of like a note taker, an interviewer, a particular person for psychological counseling, and also another one who is actually doing the mapping within the fields. So this is how actually we try to do the team formation. But the main challenge is due to the density within the camp areas. It's not always possible for us to make a proper place to conduct the interview. So this is a very big challenge, I would say, when we are actually interviewing the victims and survivors of the sexual violence.
Thank you so much for that. It was so interesting. Amir, are you there with us?
Yes, it took me some time to unmute.
Thank you. I'll ask you then our last question before we open it up for questions. And I see that James has dropped a question in the chat, and I would encourage anyone else who has questions for our panelists to also drop it in the chat, or feel free to ask directly when we open up the floor to questions. What practical advice, Amir, would you have for our civil society members about building coalitions to strengthen advocacy prevention, atrocity prevention in your advocacy efforts? Have you engaged international actors at all? And if so, can you speak about the benefits or drawbacks of international intervention, particularly in the Balkans where you work?
Okay, it's very complicated. Now, let me put it this. Let me just say that we are a state-owned government institution, and our ability to build coalitions and to reach out or to engage in certain issues is restricted by that very fact. Our policies, our views very often have to chime in government. That's not necessarily the best place to be, particularly if you're coming from a small government, a small country whose voice is not necessarily relevant on the international stage. Now, I've been here for only a year, and the kind of cooperation that we've established are with similar, if you will, brick and mortar institutions such as U.S. Holocaust Memorial, such as the Shoah Foundation, Aegis Museum, and so on. We have not been created to do things like that, but we do it locally. We have built a series of partnerships and dare say networks with local civil society organizations, local media, in order to fight. And this is the real question. I mean, where does fighting impunity stops and and prevention begins in a country like this. And most recently, it was us, it was this institution that revealed that one of the most powerful persons in this country, the prime minister, Bosnia is the Bosnian political system is very complicated, but let's just say, for the purposes of this conversation, the chief executive of the part of the country that's predominantly Serb now was actually himself involved in the massacre at Srebrenica, and he was actually never questioned by the office of the prosecutor. So what we did, we dug through our archives, we found testimonies, we found intercepted telephone conversations, we found other related documents, and we made it available to the media. Now, it was only after that our office of the prosecutor actually launched an investigation into this gentleman. Now, that's the kind of thing that we do here. Unfortunately, with many similar events, similar to Bosnia, occurring elsewhere, and the focus and the attention shifting, it didn't really cause the kind of uproar internationally or even regionally as I was hoping. But this is the kind of thing that we do. The one good thing about this place is that it's actually based and built on documentation. It's based and built on forensic evidence. I was, listening to our friend from Guatemala very attentively, very keenly earlier on, because some of the people, I believe, from Guatemala, some forensic anthropologists were actually involved in criminal prosecution of individuals responsible for Srebrenica. We have a different type of challenge when it comes to documentation. Let me put it this way: the documentation that exists has become available, and we have come into its possession. I mean, it's become public as a result of criminal prosecution. Now, the problem is that what's publicly available is a few 100,000 documents and statements, but that's only just, and we now have in excess of 100,000 of those documents, orders, instructions, witness statements, video clips, and so on. But the problem is that it's only the tip of the iceberg, because most of the evidence, and this is another battle that we're fighting, most of the evidence is kept under lock and key in The Hague at the ICTY, and the public of Bosnia and Herzegovina is never going to see it. We're never even going to see digitized copies of it, let alone the originals. The originals are probably going to end up somewhere in a UN storehouse or storage in New Jersey or wherever it is that they keep it. And the Bosnian public will never know what is in those millions of pages that are our history, that in the end of the day were actually collected for the most part by the Bosnian security, intelligence, and police agencies in the process of documenting crimes as they were happening. And I was very impressed by Dario's testimony earlier on, by his statement talking about documentation. In Bosnian case, one of the advantages was that it was actually outsiders, and not outsiders as in outside the country, outsiders as in professional police and, if you will, military personnel who took the statements that could immediately be taken to court, and that in most cases were taken to court. But not all of those statements actually had probative value, and not all of those statements were used. And what we were now trying to make up for that disadvantage by complementing that with oral histories. And we have already done hundreds of oral histories. One of the first things that we did a series of 100 oral histories with children who survived the seizure of evidence. We're now in the process of interviewing another 100 survivors, and we'll be doing another 500 of those in 2021. But once again, you know, the case with the Bosnian Serb official I was telling you earlier on shows how important documentation can be. What, 25 years after the fact, and you know, given the context and given the surrounding, given the environment in all of former Yugoslavia, I'm not really sure whether to call it fighting impunity or preventing crimes. You know, advocating prevention, because the situation here is not necessarily very stable. There is a resurgence of authoritarianism. Nationalism is ever more virulent, and there's of course outside players who would like to exploit that to their own ends. So once again, a very long-winded answer. You know, I'm really sorry about this, but you know, once you get me started, that's it. This is what you get.
Please don't apologize, because I think you raised some very interesting points, and I think that our participants would value, I guess, the candor in your response. So thank you. I'm going to open it up to questions right now, because I see that we're running close to the end of the session. I'll go back to James's question up here. Sorry, I'm just scrolling to it. The question is for Noreen. Thank you for your presentation on your work. After your post-documentation period, how did your organization connect with the victims and witnesses? How did your organization connect the victims and witnesses with the competent courts in terms of accountability?
Thanks for the question. As this particular research, the Rohingya research, it's still ongoing, so we have to analyze more on our findings and prepare for more. So apart from that, what we actually did since 2018, I would say, because in 2017 we were involved in collecting the informations and conducting the interviews in the camp areas. So as we have already completed 6 field visits in the camps, including 1 pilot research visit. Apart from that, actually, whatever we have tried to gather and legally analyze the crime elements and other issues, we tried to disseminate the report that we published to the international community, especially to the UN organs which are involved in the investigative mechanisms. So this is how actually we try to reach the relevant organs who are actually focusing on this particular crisis and planning to do more investigation in this regard. So this is how we, as a civil society organization, we try to share our own findings to the world at large. And apart from that, I would say whatever we have collected from the field, all the evidence actually do not have, all the evidence, I would say, that do not have all the probative value as per the court structure. So we can't actually say that all the evidence are accurate and all the evidence can meet the requirements of the particular tribunal or the court which are going to deal with this conflict. So whatever we tried to gather, we made a cluster to all the evidence and findings and also the information. And then we tried to communicate with those who are actually working in the investigative mechanisms. And this is how actually we are communicating and having the engagements. And apart from that, as you know, the International Criminal Court, the team few years back actually came here in Bangladesh to look for the respondents and also the victims and survivors who are present in the field in the camp area. So they also came to visit us, and they also wanted to know what we have observed and what are our own analysis. So this is how actually we have the communication between those who are engaging with the judicial activism, and this is how actually we try to connect with the victims to the concerned authorities. So this is it actually, the answer. Thank you.
Thank you so much. There was one request, Noreen, for you about the report on regarding the project on sexual violence and whether there's any accessible information online.
Did the person actually meant the Rohingya research or the 1971? If that is the Rohingya research, then the maximum information can be found in that particular report that I already shared in the chat box. But if that is the 1971 issue, then I would say it's still a confidential one. There are some sensitivities that we need to follow, and also the court proceedings actually going on. So we actually can't share all this, but there are plenty of resources, plenty of books where one can find the stories and the narratives of the victims of sexual violence. If that is needed, I can certainly share with them. Just send me an email. I will be happy to help. Thank you.
Sure, that might also be something great to add to the Padlet if it's in that format.
Okay, sure.
So I am cognizant of the time, and so I'm going to ask our panelists one last question to wrap up, I guess in 2 minutes or less, if possible. I'll start with Amir. I know, can you fill in the blank, please? I know my advocacy is effective when?
I know my advocacy is effective when I'm being personally attacked by the nationalist press. I know I'm, and it doesn't need 2 minutes to find.
Okay. Do you want to expound on that at all?
No. I mean, the thing is, there's an entire ecosystem, media ecosystem in this country that's essentially serving as a propaganda arm of nationalists, extremists, and as in the case that I mentioned earlier, for a week or so that took us to get the documents and the evidence of into the public, being persistently and doggedly attacked by nationalist media, and I knew we were doing something right the moment that the first article popped up on my Google alert. I knew, okay, this is it. We got it right. Let's just keep going, and we're doing a good job as long as they're coming after us.
And have there been any strategies that you've used, I guess, in the face of those attacks?
Not really. I mean, you cannot defend yourselves. These are not attacks that you can defend yourself from. They are essentially along the same lines of wartime propaganda, such as calling me an Islamic fundamentalist, jihadist, all these key words, all the nice words that you use about Muslims nowadays. So but once again, it's not, these are not people necessarily. The reality in which you and I live doesn't really oblige them at all, and it would be a waste of time to defend yourself against that. It would be a waste of resources as well, and we have very limited resources. So rather than putting someone on answering those attacks, I'd put that person on furthering what it is that we're doing that is causing these attacks.
I think that's a really good perspective, and I'm sure that everyone attending has had to deal with some sort of threat, whether it's to security or to the work that you're doing.
Oh, don't worry about security. I had people threaten me to dig my father's bones out of the cemetery. So, that's completely fine. You know, I'm used to that. It comes with the territory, and in many ways, what we do here has no precedent whatsoever. This is a monument. This is a memorial to a series of crimes committed between 92 and 95, and a monument, a memorial erected precisely where the crimes were committed in the territory that's still held by the people and the politics that are responsible for the crime. So, you know, threats, ad hominem attacks, all of that comes with the territory.
Thank you. And thank you for being willing to share that with us.
Not a problem.
Thank you. Noreen, I'll also ask you to fill in the blank. I know my advocacy is effective when.
I know my advocacy is effective when it serves the victims a pathway to be empowered socially and legally, and at the same time when it fulfills the objective of ending impunity in the world. So yeah, this is basically my motto, I would say, and also I'm very lucky enough that my institution also thinks about the same.
That's really great. I think that's a good note for us to conclude this session. So thank you very much to both of our panelists. I really learned a lot from hearing about the work that you did, and I'm sure that all of the participants did as well. So Sylvia, thank you. I'll turn it back to you.
Thank you. Thank you, Pratima. Thank you, Noreen. Thank you, Emir. Time is also always an issue, and technology and internet connection as well. So I hope we can hold another conversation like this one soon. And if it can be in person, even better. So thank you very much to the two of you. Before we go into our 15-minute coffee break, a couple of reminders. Please fill out the poll that Ashley is going to share now. During the coffee break, we are showing a video message by Antonio Guterres, United Nations Secretary General on Human Rights Day. The theme of this year is Recover Better, Stand Up for Human Rights. So very much aligned to our overall thematic work. And then when we come back from the coffee break, we will break into groups and we'll participate in 2 sessions for coalition members only. So I look forward to seeing you in 15 minutes and get the conversation going. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.